So, fellas, we've just had UFC London, Edwards versus Braden. Obviously, with this card, there's some fights that need to be made, so I'm going to be matchmaking every single winner from the prelims, every single winner and loser from the main card. I've got the timestamps on screen if you want to go to a specific area of the card, and we'll go in there with the first winner from the prelims, which was Caio Fernandez, beating Guram Kutladze after Guram didn't show up. Good win for Caio Fernandez, though. Beating Guram is a very good win. Guram's a solid fighter to beat, or at least he was coming into this fight as a massive underdog. I think Caio Fernandez should take on Matt Frivola next. Yeah, Matt Frivola, he's had a rough past few fights. He got brutalized and finished by Faraziam, and then his most recent fight, the exact same thing happened to him. Oh, no, that was his most recent fight. Before that, he got brutalized and knocked out by Benoit Saint-Denis, who was on a 2-fight losing streak, 1 fight each year, knocked out brutally in both of those fights. He needs a bit of a step down in competition. I think Caio Fernandez, who just beat the brakes of Guram Kutladze and dominated him, maybe even got a 10-8 in one of the rounds for 3 rounds straight. I think he needs a bit of a step up in competition, and I feel like Matt Frivola is that guy. This would be a violent fight. It's not an ideal fight for Matt Frivola because he's having to face a tall, dangerous striker in Caio Fernandez, but at the same time, it's definitely a step down from Faraziam and Benoit Saint-Denis, two of the best, two of some of the best lightweights in the world, so I think Caio Fernandez, give him a step up in competition, give him Matt Frivola whenever Frivola's ready to come back. I think that'd be a really fun fight, and obviously Frivola should be ready to fight in summer. I know we got knocked out brutally by Faraziam, but that was in October, maybe not summertime, but maybe that's August, September. Caio Fernandez, Matt Frivola, let's book it. And then for Cowlin Loughran, 2-2 in the UFC, just beat Nathan Fletcher. This might be a bit of a bad shout, but I think Cowlin Loughran versus Peyton Talbot next. Now, hear me out. These guys have had a bit of a back and forth on Twitter. Cowlin Loughran's been calling out Peyton Talbot, saying it's an easy win. Peyton Talbot's been responding, kind of mocking Cowlin Loughran. They've had a bit of a back and forth on Twitter, so they're familiar with each other. But I feel like now's the perfect time to do it. Peyton Talbot just got throw-checked by Raoni Barcelos, dominated by Raoni Barcelos at UFC 311, and previously to that, he was a massive prospect. Cowlin Loughran's kind of been getting the work done. I know he lost to Jake Hadley in his last fight, but he just got a good win over Nathan Fletcher. And he seems to be building on a good pace. He seems to be somebody to look out for as Cowlin Loughran. I say we do him versus Peyton Talbot. I actually think Loughran could win this fight. Now, I would definitely bet on Talbot. I would definitely bet on Talbot piecing up Cowlin Loughran, probably finding the finish at some point in the fight. But Cowlin Loughran's got decent boxing. He's well-rounded. He can grapple too. He's got a good pace for 15 minutes. His chin isn't bad as well. He's fought the likes of Taylor Lapillus, and Jake Hadley hasn't even been dropped. So, Cowlin Loughran versus Peyton Talbot for potentially a warm-up fight for Peyton Talbot, while they're both going to trash talk each other in the build-up to the fight, I think would make sense. So, Cowlin Loughran, give him Peyton Talbot. Now's the perfect time to do it. That Peyton Talbot's coming off a loss, Loughran's coming off a win, and Talbot needs to step down. Loughran, Talbot, let's get the fight done. Next up, we had Sean O'Bannon get one of the only finishes on the card. Maybe women MMA is the new source of finishing fights, because none of the men really got a finish on this card. But Sean O'Bannon gets a finish. A massive comeback victory over Puja Toma, wins a bonus. I think for Sean O'Bannon, we give her somebody experienced. We've given her 3 fights. All 3 of the fighters that she's fought in the UFC, apart from Bruna Brazil, haven't really been that good. And even Bruna Brazil's not like a top fighter. I think we give her Karolina Kowalkiewicz. I think this is a good fight for Sean O'Bannon. Karolina's quite experienced in the UFC. She's been in there for quite some time, but she's a bit of an awkward fighter. She's a very high-paced kickboxer, not the hardest hitter. He's kind of on the way out, a little bit washed nowadays. I think it's the perfect fight to test Sean O'Bannon. If Sean O'Bannon can go out there and beat Karolina, that's, I think, 4 or 3 wins in the UFC. That's a win over an experienced fighter. That gets Sean O'Bannon close to the rankings, and if she can beat Karolina, she's probably going to get a fight in the top 15. But it's also a chance for Karolina to shut down Sean O'Bannon. I think this is just a good fight to test Sean O'Bannon. I don't want to throw Sean O'Bannon in the top 15 immediately, because, like I said, she nearly got knocked out by Puja Toma. She lost to Bruna Brazil, and she won a close decision over Alice Ardeline. Even though she's coming off that good finish, give her Karolina Kowalkiewicz, a bit of a veteran in women MMA, an experienced fighter who's on the way out. Sean O'Bannon, Karolina Kowalkiewicz for a fun kind of taekwondo kickboxing match that you can bet is going to go to a decision. Then we had Christine Leroy Duncan beat Andre Pulaev after he pretty much beat him everywhere the fight went, was dominated him on the feet, and then just decided to keep holding him against the cage, which I don't really understand. For Christine Leroy Duncan, I think he should fight Gerald Meerschaert next. I think this might be a bit of a harsh matchup for Christine Leroy Duncan, because he has been just getting past everybody with ease, apart from Gregor Rodriguez and Armand Petrosian a few fights ago. But I think this is a good fight to test Christine Leroy Duncan, because GM3, another guy who's experienced in the UFC, another guy who's faced many different styles, coming off a loss to Rainy Derrida, but it was a bit of a back and forth fight, and obviously an amazing grappler. I think this could be a good fight for test Christine Leroy Duncan. I do think Christine Leroy Duncan, as long as he doesn't do dumb shit, would piece up and probably knock out GM3 in this fight. I think GM3 might actually be booked as well against Brad Tavares, so maybe you do Christine Leroy Duncan Duncan against the winner of that. But yeah, Christian Leroy Duncan, GM3, Brad Tavares. If you can beat the winner of that fight, get him close to the rankings, give him like, I don't know, some unranked middleweight who's doing pretty well. But that's what I would do next for Christian Leroy Duncan. Then we had Marcin Tybura gatekeep the top 10 of the heavyweight division again as he goes out there and beats Mick Parkin in a very close fight. Didn't do it in dominating fashion like he did to Denise. Now, he's on a 2-fight winning streak now. I think we've got to give Marcin Tybura a rest of fighting these young up-and-comers and killing every heavyweight prospect we've got. So I think for Marcin Tybura, we do him versus Sergey Pavlovich. This is essentially just to give Sergey Pavlovich another highlight reel win, to give him on a 2-fight winning streak, to give him some momentum as he goes back into the top 5. Pavlovich needs a big win. He couldn't get it against Rosenstrike. I think Tybura, with how he performed against Mick Parkin, would be that perfect fight to give Sergey Pavlovich a highlight reel and go into the top 5 with a bit of momentum on a 2-fight winning streak, because there isn't really any big names for Sergey Pavlovich next. He's ranked number 4 in the division. He's already lost to Volkov. He's already lost to Aspinall. He's already fought Blades. Him versus Gorn doesn't make sense. Gorn's coming off a win. So I think Pavlovich is going to have the fight down again, and Marcin Tybura, who's on a 2-fight winning streak, has kind of deserved to get a big fight now. So Tybura versus Sergey Pavlovich, let's book the fight, maybe in like some sort of Abu Dhabi card. If Tybura can somehow dog his way through and get a win over Sergey Pavlovich, fair play to Marcin Tybura. Might have replaced Neil Magny for being the best gatekeeper, or maybe they're just the best gatekeeper in the UFC, and maybe from there we can start talking about a Marcin Tybura title run and put him against the likes of Curtis Blades and Volkov again. But it is probably going to be Pavlovich going out there and just steamrolling Marcin Tybura. I know he couldn't do it against Rosenstrike, but Tybura is different to Rosenstrike. He's more gritty, he's more well-rounded, his stamina's not as good, and he's he's pretty awful on the feet. So I am trusting that Pavlovich gets this one done. Pavlovich to shut down Marcin Tybura, get a free highlight reel, go on a 2-fight winning streak, get back into the top 5 with some momentum, and then maybe go and fight somebody like Cyril Garn or whoever tends to be in the top 5, like maybe a Gelton Almeida at the time. So Tybura versus Pavlovich on a pay-per-view main card is the fight that I would do next. And then we had Lonnie Kavanagh. One of flyweights' best prospects, looked really good in against Felipe de Santos. One of his best performances yet, and one of the best fights on the card as well. Dominated him with the wrestling, looked rapid on the feet. I think for Lonnie Kavanagh, we give him Cody Durden next. Now, I know people are going to say top 15 for Lonnie Kavanagh, but the top 15 of the flyweight division is actually quite competitive to get in. You've got Joshua Van, Charles Johnson, Kai Asakura's just been kicked out the rankings, so it's in a bit of a weird spot. You could have put him against Kai Asakura, but I've already got a fight for Asakura. But for Lonnie Kavanagh, I think Cody Durden's that good fight. Cody Durden's very winnable for Lonnie Kavanagh, in my opinion. He used to be ranked, did Cody Durden. He's kind of like a pressure wrestler. He's going to pressure you, hasn't got the best defense on the feet, kind of just takes a beating as he did against Joshua Van, and he likes to shoot takedowns a lot. I think this is a very favourable matchup for Lonnie Kavanagh. I think he'd piece up Cody Durden on the feet. Felipe de Santos is a much better striker than Cody Durden, so I think we get to see the striking showcase of Lonnie Kavanagh, and when Cody Durden does shoot a takedown, we've just seen that Lonnie Kavanagh can deal with grappling. I mean, he just out-grappled Felipe de Santos for at least 10 minutes straight. So Lonnie Kavanagh, Cody Durden. If Lonnie Kavanagh can beat Cody Durden, give him somebody in the top 15 of the flyweight division, maybe even somebody in the top 10, because we need as much new names in this division as possible. And for Cody Durden, he's getting to fight a young up-and-coming prospect just like he did against Joshua Van, and it's another opportunity for him to shut somebody down. So Lonnie Kavanagh, Cody Durden, the last kind of hurdle before we give Lonnie Kavanagh somebody in the top 15 of the flyweight division. That is what I would do next. And then we had Chris Padilla beat Jai Herbert in one of the most uneventful fights of the card. Give him Drakkar Klose. I actually think this could be quite a good fight stylistically, because Drakkar Klose, heavy wrestler, has good finishing ability, can hang on the feet. Chris Padilla, heavy wrestler, decent finishing ability, can hang on the feet. Two very similar fighters in terms of style. Drakkar Klose just lost to Yoel Alvarez, but at the end of the day, there's no shame in losing to Yoel Alvarez. I would pick Drakkar Klose to beat Chris Padilla, especially with how close and hesitant Chris Padilla made that fight, but I just think it makes sense. It's a step up for Chris Padilla after beating Jai Herbert. It gets him closer to the rankings. Padilla, Drakkar Klose, let's get it done. And then we had Morgan Charrier, the first fighter on the main card who lost to Nathaniel Wood. 2-2 in the UFC now. Lost a fairly uneventful fight to Nathaniel Wood, where Morgan Charrier just seems like he was there to survive rather than there to actually engage. And I assume that was because he got caught twice in that first round by Nathaniel Wood. I think for Morgan Charrier, we give him Jose Delgado. Now, if you don't know who Jose Delgado is, he's a really good prospect. In the featherweight division, just fought on the Contender Series. No, he fought in the UFC after winning on the Contender Series. Brutalized his opponent. I think he's like 8-0, and every single one of his wins are via finish. He's a good prospect. He trains out of a good team as well. So Jose Delgado, he's going to need to step up in competition now. He's a talented guy to look out for in the featherweight division. And I think Morgan Charrier, who's 2-2 in the UFC, coming off a loss to Nathaniel Wood, is that perfect guy to put him against. And it's just a really good fight in general because you've got two guys who usually finish their fights. Morgan Charrier, known for being a bit of a knockout machine, has heavy hands. Jose Delgado, like I just said, finished every single one of his fights. So Morgan Charrier, step down in competition. Welcome Jose Delgado into his second fight in the UFC. Let's do it. And then for Nathaniel Wood, Wood's in a really difficult career spot. He's kind of like one of the best unranked guys in the featherweight division, where he just clears out the featherweight division outside the rankings, and then his final hurdle before he gets ranked, he always comes short against. He was on a 5-fight winning streak, faces Mahabid Naimov, loses a controversial decision, and now he's on another 2-fight winning streak. I think we give him a big name, and I think he's earned Edson Barboza. Now, Barboza's not ranked in the top 15 of the featherweight division, but unfortunately for Wood, the top 15 of the featherweight division is just too competitive. But no, I think he should fight Edson Barboza. This would be such a good fight. Barboza's now a bit old, he's a bit washed, but he's still got pop in him, man. In his last fight, I think it was against Lerone Murphy in his last fight, he did look pretty good in that fight with the kickboxing. He's still a talented guy, he's a veteran of the sport. This is a perfect fight to test Nathaniel Wood. If Nathaniel Wood can go out there and look good, like he just did it against pretty much every time he goes out there, he looks good. So if he can look good against Edson Barboza, that tells me that Nathaniel Wood's ready for the top 15 of the featherweight division. Give him a Dan Ige, give him a Calvin Kattar, give him somebody in the top 15, and finally give him the opportunity to fight a ranked opponent. And for Edson Barboza, another winnable fight, because I can kind of see Edson Barboza make it into a bit of a dogfight and just purely outstriking Nathaniel Wood in this fight. So I think it's a good fight. The final hurdle, a big name for Nathaniel Wood before he gets into the top 15. That final stamp on your legacy against a veteran, against a legend in Edson Barboza, or maybe like a fight night main card. Nathaniel Wood, Edson Barboza would be the fight I would make. And imagine how good this fight would be. Nathaniel Wood, even though he's not got the best finishing ability, he's usually going out there and putting on dogfights. A very technical and calculated striker. And obviously Edson Barboza, never in a boring stand-up fight. Barboza, Wood, let's get it done. And then for Jordan Vucenic, now, I'm a bit worried that the UFC are going to cut Jordan Vucenic from the UFC because he's 0-2 in the UFC, lost to Guram Kutateladze, which after last night hasn't really aged quite well, and just got submitted by Chris Duncan. He might get cut from the UFC. I want to give him one more opportunity because, to be fair, the 2 fights that he's had in the UFC have been, they've been good fights, and I still feel like he is UFC worthy. So I would do Jordan Vucenic versus Anshel Jubilee, the fight for the UFC contract. Both of these guys trying to redeem their UFC contract to stay in the UFC. I think this makes a lot of sense. Anshel Jubilee just lost to Quinlan Salkid. Now, to be fair to Jubilee, I mean, first of all, the UFC, if they're trying to get an Indian market, they need to keep Anshel Jubilee because he's the only Indian in the UFC right now. I mean, we just saw Puja Tomo got submitted by Sean Abaddon, so they need to keep Anshel Jubilee around. He just got finished by Quinlan Salkid, but it was quite a controversial stoppage because the fight stopped as soon as he got dropped. And for Jordan Vucenic, he needs to step down in competition. Give him Anshel Jubilee. Very winnable fight for Jordan Vucenic. Give him Anshel Jubilee. Winner stays in the UFC, loser gets cut for good. That's the fight I would do. And then for Chris Duncan, trains at American Top Team, looked really good in his last 2 fights, 2 guillotines in a row. He called out Terrence McKinney. Let's get the fight done. Terrence McKinney versus Chris Duncan. I think the fight needs to be made. This would be such a good fight, man, because Terrence McKinney is obviously one of the funnest fighters in the UFC, has some of the shortest average fight time, where it's unlikely that you're going to see Terrence McKinney fight go past 2 minutes. It's either him going to get knocked out or he's going to knock somebody else out. And Chris Duncan has kind of got he hasn't got the same finishing ability as Terrence McKinney, but he's still, he's got pop in his hands. He's got KO ability in his hands, and obviously his submission game seems to have massively improved. He's been in multiple different dogfights now. I think this is the fight to make. Terrence McKinney coming off a good win, Chris Duncan coming off a good win, put them against each other. 2 guys on the come up. Winner gets somebody close to the rankings. I think this should be the fight to make. And then for Alexia Dainera, obviously Molly McCann retired from the sport, which is why I've not match made it, so Molly McCann's done. But for Alexia Dainera, good win over Molly McCann, 12-1, actually quite a decent prospect in the women's strawweight division. For Alexia Dainera, I would do her versus Polyana Viana. Yeah, let's not rush Alexia Dainera. She beat Molly McCann, but Molly McCann's probably one of the worst strawweights on the roster. So I think Polyana Viana is a good step up in competition for her second fight in the UFC. I want to see how Dainera looks on a full training camp because she looked good out there on like 7 days notice. Polyana Viana is another good grappler. She's fought a couple of good names in the UFC. She does seem to be losing more than she's winning. She's not the most consistent fighter, and I would definitely favour Dainera to win this fight, but It gives her more experience in the UFC. It's a step up in competition. If she can go out there in a full training camp and absolutely dominate Polyana Viana, that tells us a lot about Alexei Dinera, and she might actually become a bit of a prospect, a grappling prospect in the 120, in the 115-pound division for the women's strawweight division. So Alexei Dinera, give her Polyana Viana. And then for Gunnar Nelson, very inactive, comes back after a layoff, nearly finishes Kevin Holland with an arm triangle choke, which would have been sick, but eventually gets beaten by decision after he kind of just got pieced up on the feet after Holland defended every takedown. For Gunnar Nelson, I think a really good fight would be him versus Austin Vanderford. Austin Vanderford, Paige Van Zandt's husband, just got a good win at UFC Seattle. I forgot who he fought. He was fighting that Russian dude or wherever he's from, and he absolutely dominated him with the grappling. Two heavy grapplers. I think this makes a lot of sense. Austin Vanderford just got his debut win in the UFC. Gunnar Nelson's a good grappler, lost to Kevin Holland. Two heavy guys, two heavy grapplers, should I say, with a heavy grappling approach. If you're a fan of grappling, you got to be a fan of this fight. Gunnar Nelson, Austin Vanderford, get the fight done. And then for Kevin Holland, let him fight his counterpart. It's got to be done. Everyone talks about Derek Lewis versus Rosenstrike. Well, we have a welterweight equivalent of that fight. Kevin Holland versus Neil Magny. These guys are virtually identical, and I'm not even just saying that because of the way that they look, but just their style and just the position of their career. Two guys who are never going to be a champion, two guys who are never going to be in the top 10, two guys who are a bit of a gatekeeper in the welterweight division now, let's be completely honest. Both massively inconsistent, and they've got a very similar style. Light on the feet. Kevin Holland's definitely a harder hitter than Neil Magny, but Neil Magny's probably more grittier. Neil Magny's probably got the better wrestling. Holland's probably got the better jiu-jitsu. They're very similar They're like very similar in like the position of their career, just their entire style. And I feel like we've got to get the fight done. Neil Magny versus Kevin Holland. Kevin Holland coming off a win over Gunnar Nelson. Neil Magny was ranked coming off two losses in a row, two knockout losses in a row to what's his name, Michael Morales and Carlos Prates. Let's give him Kevin Holland. Holland, Magny, potentially like a fight night main event in the Apex. I don't know how Kevin Holland's going to feel about that. He's probably going to have an ego and say that he needs to find a pay-per-view main card. I wouldn't be surprised if Neil Magny gets this one done. You would not bet on this fight. Two of the most inconsistent fighters in the UFC, but let's get it done. Holland, Magny, perfect time to make it. And then for Jan Blachowicz, I kind of feel for him, man. Loses a very, very controversial decision in what a lot of people thought he beat Carlos Ulberg. He is on, I think, a 3-fight losing streak now where he lost to Pereira, he lost to Ulberg, and he had that draw against Magomed Ankalaev. His last legitimate win was all the way back in 2021 when he beat Adesanya. I think we give Jan Blachowicz the winner of Azamat Murzakanov and Johnny Walker. I think that's the perfect fight to make. Blachowicz is going to have to fight down now, unfortunately. Even though it was a close fight, I'm not saying he needs to fight outside the top 15, but he needs to get in that position where he's welcoming some guys in. He just welcomed Carlos Ulberg in. And I think Walker versus Murzakanov is that fight to make. I don't know when they're fighting, but they have got a fight booked. I think it's in May. If Johnny Walker beats Azamat Murzakanov, that's a miracle. And then Johnny Walker versus Jan Blachowicz would actually be quite an interesting fight because Jan Blachowicz, with the KO power that he does, definitely has the capability to sleep Johnny Walker. But I mean, if Johnny Walker can go out there and piece up Murzakanov, I think him versus Jan Blachowicz could be a really fun striking matchup. And for Azamat Murzakanov, if he can probably and inevitably go out there and knock out Johnny Walker, he's an undefeated light heavyweight prospect. Him against Jan Blachowicz, his biggest test yet, will be a good fight for Azamat Murzakanov. So for Jan Blachowicz, I'd do him versus the winner of Walker and Murzakanov. Whoever wins that fight, give him to Jan Blachowicz as a bit of a step down. And then for Carlos Ulberg, called for a title shot. No, you're not getting a title shot, mate. Because obviously we've got Alex Pereira versus Magomed Ankalaev. Yuri's in the wings. Ulberg's in the wings. It's the perfect time to do it. Carlos Ulberg versus Yuri Prohaska. Especially after a performance like that where you had a very, very close fight with Jan Blachowicz. You definitely don't get a title shot like that. So I would do a big #1 contender fight. Carlos Ulberg, Yuri Prohaska. I think this would be fireworks. I know Ulberg just had quite an uneventful fight with Jan Blachowicz, but Yuri Prohaska's not going to allow you to make it uneventful. The guy's going to put you on the back foot, but he's actually going to pressure you. Like Jan Blachowicz puts people on the back foot, but he doesn't really do anything with it. Yuri's actively looking to deal damage. He's one of the most crafty, weird fighters in the UFC, coming off that good finish over Jamal Hill. Carlos Ulberg, it seems like as we've given Ulberg these step up in competitions, he's kind of looked worse and worse. Didn't look amazing against Duzdemir, looked even worse against Jan Blachowicz. I would favour Yuri to win this fight, but if Ulberg wins, you've got a new dog at the top of the 205-pound division. #1 contender fight. The winner of this fight is the winner of Ankalaev and Pereira. Yuri Prohaska, Carlos Ulberg, big #1 contender fight in the light heavyweight division, and it probably, if this is 5 rounds, it's going to end in a stoppage. Let's get it done. And then for Leon Edwards, been broken and dominated by Sean Brady, been broken and dominated by Colby Covington, had a bit of a mid-title run. Let's get him away from grapplers. The last time Leon Edwards fought a pure striker was so long ago. I guess Nate Diaz was the last proper striker that he fought, but even Nate Diaz is a bit of a... He's not really a fighter, is he? He just walks forward and slaps people. So I would do Leon Edwards against the winner of Jeff Neal and Carlos Prates. I think that's the perfect fight to make. Jeff Neal and Carlos Prates have a fight booked at UFC 314, so it's fairly soon, so it kind of makes sense in terms of time frames. If Carlos Prates beats Jeff Neal, which he probably will, he's a huge striking prospect. He's going to need a big win from there. Leon Edwards, a striker, a top contender of the welterweight division. I think he's the perfect fight to make. Two guys who hate grapplers, two guys who love striking. Edwards, Prates, a massive fight, potential fight night, co-main event or pay-per-view fight on the main card, wherever. I think that'll be the fight to make. And for Jeff Neal, if he can beat Carlos Prates, he's just shut down one of the biggest striking prospects, a fighting nerd. He'd have been on a 2-fight winning streak, and I think Leon Edwards getting a big step down away from the title picture against Jeff Neal would be the fight to make. Either way, just don't put Leon Edwards against a grappler. Do him versus the winner of Prates and Neal. It's a perfect fight to make. It's the perfect time to make it. Welcomes Prates and Neal into the top of the welterweight division. Let's get that fight done for Leon Edwards. And then for Sean Brady, stop saying Sean Brady versus Shavkat. Shavkat's earned a title fight. I know he just pulled out due to injury, but Shavkat's done it, man. He's beaten like 4 ranked opponents. You just beat Ian Gary. He was supposed to fight Bilal Muhammad. Bilal Muhammad pulls out, he goes and beats Ian Gary, and now you're saying he has to go and beat somebody else on top of that. No, give Shavkat a title shot against the winner of JDM. Also, don't give Brady an immediate title shot as well. There's a logjam in the welterweight division. There's too many top contenders. Brady versus Buckley should have been the fight to make. There is a bit of a logjam. You've got JDM fighting Bilal Muhammad at UFC 315. You've got Shavkat as the #1 contender. You've got Brady up there. You've got Buckley up there. You've got Makhachev saying he wants to move up if JDM becomes a champion. Too many guys. We need to cut down the queue. Big #1 contender fight, Sean Brady versus Joaquin Buckley towards the end of this year, maybe in like August or July, I think would be the fight to get done. And what I really like about this fight is I would say both of these guys are actually the biggest threats to Bilal Muhammad. I know Bilal Muhammad's beat Sean Brady before, but if you really think about it, you've got Joaquin Buckley, a strong, explosive striker who can wrestle as well, has a really good double leg takedown, but also has pop in his hands and can actually box across 15 minutes. I think he'd be a nightmare matchup for Bilal Muhammad. And then you've got Sean Brady, who has been finished by Bilal Muhammad, but since losing has looked like he's looked probably better than Bilal Muhammad with the wrestling. He dominated Leon in an even worse fashion than Bilal Muhammad did. He's probably got better submission game than Bilal Muhammad. His wrestling's probably equal. His stand-up looks pretty equal too, especially with how he was outboxing Leon Edwards just then. So I think these two guys are actually the biggest threats to Bilal Muhammad. Put them in a #1 contender fight, cut down the queue. This would be such a good fight, man, because I wouldn't know who to pick. I'd probably lean towards... I don't even know who I'd lean towards at this moment in time. Buckley Brady, 5 rounds in a co-main event of a fight night, or maybe like a... No, not even a co-main event. Do it as a fight night main event to determine who fights the winner of Bilal, JDM, and obviously maybe Shavkat if you want to throw Shavkat in the mix too. But that would be the fight I would make next for Sean Brady. Not him getting an immediate title fight. There's too many guys. Not him against Shavkat Rakhmonov. Shavkat's earned his shot. Let's do him versus Joaquin Buckley. Buckley called him out on Twitter. I think it makes a lot of sense. But those are the fights I would make after UFC London. Let me know your thoughts on the fights. If you agree, disagree, if you change anything around, let me know your thoughts. Thank you for